Will McCauley is the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Veterinary Biologics section of the Animal Health Institute, a DC-based trade association that represents the manufacturers of veterinary pharmaceuticals and biologics in the United States. Dr. McCauley attended Texas A&M University, where he earned his bachelor's, MBA, and DVM, finally leaving school in 2012. After vet school, he completed a small animal rotating internship in Charlotte, North Carolina, before moving back to Texas and practicing small animal and exotic medicine in Dallas for 4 years. Dr. McCauley is an active member of the ABMA, where he serves on several committees as a volunteer, notably the Early Career Development Committee, which is devoted solely to issues facing recent graduates as they start their careers in veterinary medicine. Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. M.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the chance to speak to you and all your listeners on some exciting ways to go down a different career path in vet medicine.
Absolutely. The honor is mine, and I'm so happy to have you here. Let me just start with a quick question about where and why and when did you decide that you wanted to be a veterinarian?
I don't know if I had a typical experience. My first job at a clinic was when I was 16. I got my first car, and of course, to put gas in it, my parents said I had to get a job, and they knew some people who knew the vet, one of the local vets in Tyler, Texas, where I lived. And so I went and got a job there. I started out in the cattle parlor, mostly doing cleaning work, as most of us do, but that's where I caught the vet medicine bug and had a few different positions. I worked at the vet school before I got into vet school, and just always had that draw, like a lot of people do.
Yeah, so you started out cleaning up after cattle, and then you decided you wanted to be a small animal veterinarian?
We did small and large at that clinic, so I was exposed to dogs and cats as well at that same clinic. But that's kind of where the bottom of the totem pole was at that clinic, was out in the cattle parlor.
How funny. It was all because you needed gas money.
Right.
Oh, such strange things can determine our fate. So what was your vision for yourself when you made the decision that you wanted to become a vet? How did you envision yourself? Did you envision yourself as a mixed animal practitioner or small animal or business owner?
I kind of picture myself compared to what I saw with that first boss. He was a mixed animal practitioner there in Tyler, and I thought that's kind of all the veterinarians did. You would see cattle in the morning and pets in the afternoon, and sometimes have to go out on calls, and I thought, that's what a veterinarian is. I'll do that. And I started down that path, and I definitely enjoyed it to some degree, but I kind of found another route to go. But I never really considered another career path, I guess, other than vet medicine. Well, I take it back. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but who doesn't, right?
Or an astronaut. Or a fireman.
Yeah.
So when you were in vet school, is that when you decided to do small animal?
It was. I had always had more of a draw to the small animals, cats and dogs. We didn't have a lot of horses around my house when I was growing up. We had a farm that we had some cattle on and a few llamas and stuff like that, but I was always more drawn to the small animal side. I originally wanted to do cardiology, so I wanted to do a internship and a residency in cardio, just kind of caught the cardio bug while at school, and things happened, and I didn't end up going that path. Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, because I know that a lot of graduating new veterinarians, they want to do an internship, for one of two reasons. Either they want to specialize, or they just feel like they need more clinical experience before they actually start practicing without a net. So you actually wanted to do a residency, but then changed your mind.
That's right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of things I have to say about internships. And you're right, that's usually the two reasons to do it. One is if you want to specialize. So if you want to do a surgery residency or become a cardiologist or a neurologist, you kind of have to do an internship. That's kind of the given way. You can go out and practice for a few years and then come back, but the pretty standard way is to do an internship. For that second group that you're talking about, the ones who don't feel they have the skill sets or they're not up to par and they do an internship, do not do an internship. My opinion is do not do one. And I can have all kinds of economic data to back that up. The ABMA actually did what's called a net present value calculation for doing an internship and then not going on afterwards to specialize. and you lose money. You essentially lose money in the long run. You can never dig yourself out of that hole.
Yeah.
So for people who are thinking, oh, I didn't learn enough in vet school, you graduated and you had your DVM, you learned enough in vet school to be a veterinarian and a highly functioning veterinarian. Are you going to know everything the first day out? No, of course not. I don't know everything now, and no one does. I don't know where the idea came around that you don't learn enough in vet school to be a veterinarian, because that's patently false. I know that I heard, so, when we're in vet school, we're in that fourth year, all we hear is clinicians, the clinicians who are there, who have specialized, who have done internships, and they're saying, yeah, that's the path you need to take. Go do this internship, and then if you don't specialize, well, at least you got a little more experience, kind of have a leg up. I'm here to tell you that's not required. Financially, it's not a good idea, and it's not something that you need to do. You graduate with those 3 little letters behind your name, and you pass NAVLE and all that, and you're licensed. You know what you need to be a functioning clinical veterinarian in the United States today.
Legally. I still feel like the first 5 years after school, the first year for me was really difficult. I had a really hard time. I had all the knowledge in my head, but in terms of turning it into practicing, I had a hard time. But did you enjoy your internship or no?
I did. In certain sense, I went to a private practice, so a 3-hospital group there in Charlotte, and they had all the specialties. They had neurology, they had surgery, they had cardiology, they had all the specialties. So it wasn't like I just went and did emergency for a year,
right?
But it didn't. I ended up not specializing, and it didn't set me up, at least financially, in a way that something like that should. You're working a lot of hours that first year, and you are getting a lot of knowledge and some confidence. But for me, I don't think the payoff is there. What you trade off in salary that first year. I think that year the salary was $20,000, which is very, very little. And the amount of hours you worked, it just is not worth it, in my opinion, and the opinion of the ABMA's economics group, economic division, to do that.
Yes, I know the article that you're talking about.
Right. If you want to go down the path to specialize, and that's the only way you'll be happy, if you tell yourself, I'm only going to be happy if I'm a surgeon, then you need to do an internship to get that process going. But if there's even the slightest inkling that you may want to do something else or go into non-clinical practice, I would say hold off on the internship. By the time that second, third year rolls around, you'll be essentially even with them. The time will fly by. You'll be a lot better off financially.
Right. Because you're making so little during that time. I bet did you work out your hourly wage? Were you making like less than minimum wage while you were doing your internship?
I think I'd have ever stopped crying if I did that. God. I probably should have.
10 years of school, whatever, making $5 an hour probably.
Right.
But and then when you started at the small animal and exotic medicine clinic, that was a day practice, right?
Yep, day practice.
And because you were working at a specialty clinic for your internship, did you get any day practice experience that you found helpful?
The internal medicine rotations, that in a lot of ways kind of reflects a lot of the stuff you'll see in day practice. And we did have a general rotation as well. You'd see a few things come in, but it didn't give me the sense of what it took to be a regular practitioner, especially, like I said, I did exotics when I was in clinical practice just because I had an interest in it. I didn't even take the exotics rotation fourth year because it didn't work out with the schedule. But you learn enough to give people information when you're out there. That's another thing I can recommend to all recent grads. See anything that'll walk in the door. You may not know the first thing about birds or lizards or fish, but if you will offer to see their pet and say, hey, by no means can I say I'll for sure diagnose or treat what your animal has, but I'll come in, bring it in, and I'll assess it. That goes a long way with both clients and with your boss. If you can grow their customer base by saying, yeah, if no one else is seeing exotics in this hospital, I'll be the person that sees them. That goes such a long way, and it's such a feather in your cap. I just don't know why you would ever turn away someone, who brings in whatever just because you feel nervous about it. Just set the expectation up front that I'm by no means a bird expert, and I can't guarantee that I'll fix your guinea pig, but I'll take a look at it. We do have some diagnostics we can do, and I can research it a lot, and I'll give you a better feeling for what's going on here.
Excellent advice. Yeah. I think personally, I've always felt fear, because I didn't take the exotic classes or do an exotic rotation when I was a fourth year. And if you don't just jump in and do something, the longer you resist, the more fearful you become. So I like the advice of just jumping right in while you're a new graduate, while ignorance is still bliss.
Right.
When you're
if you're the only person seeing exotics in that clinic or that town, in about 2 weeks, you're going to be the expert because no one else is going to be doing that stuff. So the learning curve is very clear. People get concerned about imposter syndrome, and we could talk about that for hours and compare it to the Dunning-Kruger effect and all the stuff that's gone on. But imposter syndrome goes away relatively quickly once you get 1, 2, 3 fun cases under your belt. You just kind of get a better feel for it. So take that chance. Be brave and courageous, even though you may be shaking on the inside. It does work out.
Yeah. And when you started in general practice, were you shaking on the inside? I mean, how did you feel?
Oh yeah, I play a good game of putting confidence out there, but a lot of times I would be sprinting back to try to find, my Ettinger internal medicine book after an exam, or asking a lot of people that were in the clinic, hey, what would you do with this? It's not the fact that I don't want to say fake it till you make it, because you're not faking it. You're not pretending to be something you're not. But if you can get this persona, especially in that exam room, that, I'm confident in what I'm doing. I may not know 100% about what's going on here, but I definitely know more than that client, and I probably know more than 99% of the population. When you get that in your head that you are the expert in this scenario, in this situation, a lot of the stuff kind of falls into place. And that confidence kind of builds upon itself.
Right. It's just in the beginning, you have to put on a persona of being confident.
Power through. Exactly.
Yeah, power through. Now, let me ask you this, Dr. M. When you did your DVM, did you do like a dual DVM MBA degree, or did you do your MBA and then your DVM? How did that work?
So A&M has a program where there's a joint program between the vet school and the business school. So you go to your first 2 years of vet school, then you go across the street to the business school and you do an accelerated MBA program. So instead of the usual 16 months, they speed it up. You take extra classes and you graduate in 12 months. So you get your MBA then. Then you go back to vet school, you drop down a class, and you finish out your last 2 years of vet school. A&M has that program. I'm pretty sure Colorado State has that program, and maybe a few others. The timing of it may be different, but they do have combined DVM MBA programs. So
do they also have like a dual DVM MPH or Masters of Science, and some of them offer PhD? Do they offer all of those dual programs as well?
A&M, I think, does have an MPH program. They may still have the PhD. That one added on a lot of time. That one added on an extra 4 or 5 years, I think, to people's education. So not as many people did that.
Sure.
The great thing about the MBA program was it was an extra year, which seems like a lot when you're in the middle of it, and you're shifting gears so much. I mean, before I went to B school, I had one personal finance course in undergrad, and that was it. And that was all I had as far as my knowledge of business and leadership and accounting and anything like that. So the accelerated program definitely helped. But yeah, I know A&M and a few other schools do have MPH programs. Those are pretty popular, and some other ones. A lot more people are taking advantage of these days, which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you so many more options after school. Now, did you choose the MBA because you wanted to, did you want to start your own business? Did you want to climb the corporate ladder? Or what was the justification for doing an MBA as opposed to like an MPH?
By the time I got to second year, I think I decided I didn't want to own a clinic. I still thought I wanted to kind of do clinical practice and go through that, but I thought climbing the corporate ladder was kind of the way to go. I had already made some contacts with some big corporate veterinary practices, and I had gone and visited their headquarters, and I kind of liked that. And so I thought I have to stand out some way. A good way to do it would be to take this opportunity that A&M offered and do the MBA program. It was it would still be very useful for someone who does want to own their own practice, run their own business, because you need that foundational business knowledge. But for people who want to get into nonprofits, people who want to work for the government or for trade associations like I do, the finance and the accounting, that's good. But the leadership and the communications skills that you get by doing a non-clinical program, whether it be an MPH, whether it be an MBA or what have you, that is really where I find the value these days.
Interesting. Leadership and communication. That's so huge. And it's just not something that can be crammed into the already jam-packed curricula of 4-year veterinary school program, which I don't think is long enough considering how much more we know than what we used to and how many species we need to be proficient at medically in order to pass the NAVLE.
That's a good plan. And there is a shift, I think, among at the schools as far as what should they be focusing on? Do we need with like 6-hour class on parasitology? Maybe not. Maybe we could throw some leadership in there, some communication in there. Not to hate on parasitologists, but there's a change in the skills we need as veterinarians to go out and get jobs in non-clinical positions, or even just to be that clinician, to be able to convey the information we need to the public. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a few schools kind of leading the way on changing up their curriculum to better reflect that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I've actually heard some doctors recommend, if you don't do an MBA or something like that gives you those leadership and communication courses directly, go out and join Toastmasters.
Absolutely. Toastmasters is great. Organized veterinary medicine, I can't speak highly enough of, whether it be your state VMA, the ABMA, even your local. But yeah, Toastmasters, the Rotary Club, anything like that gets you out of the clinical setting, makes you kind of have to learn new ways to explain what you do and what you want to do to people who aren't in clinical medicine. Mm-hmm. You don't know how different you have to approach those conversations, how much different they are than when you're talking to another veterinarian. They're just different ways you have to go about it, and stuff like Toastmasters, Rotary Club. That's all those are very good opportunities to learn those skills.
Absolutely. Now, so for 4 years you practiced small animal exotic medicine, and what happened? What made you shift gears and take a completely different road?
Yeah. So like a lot of people, I kind of got downtrodden, and I actually was diagnosed with depression, kind of going through vet school, and for sure in those first years working. And, certain part of it probably was physiological or genetic, but a lot of it was that I wasn't fulfilled with clinical practice. It made me not the ideal employee, and it just made life harder than it needed to be. Mm-hmm. I guess my come to Jesus time was when I decided, I could sit around and do this and kind of fake it for 30 years of a career and just convince myself that I'm happy, but I don't want to do that. And I don't think a lot of people out there kind of in that same position. They think, I'm on this path. I'm a clinician. I'm practicing in Texas or Idaho or wherever it is. I need to stick with it. Mm-hmm. There wasn't some huge, near-death experience that made me decide that. It's just one day I said, I'd be okay leaving the clinic and going and having a non-clinical position. And that decision right there is a big one. That's the first and the biggest hurdle that people have to get over when they were looking to make that switch. Mm-hmm. For me, I happen to have some connections with some people at A&M that were in kind of the government arena. I kept in touch with people at the Texas VMA and the AVMA, and they kind of pointed me in the right direction to go. And that set me off on the search that lasted about a year or two before I found my current position. And it took some risk, it took some more courage, but I'm glad I took it. I'm much happier at this point in my career than I was doing clinical practice.
Right. And I want to thank you for being honest, because I think a lot of, especially new graduates, when they start practicing, they do that. I mean, you're working really hard. It's an extremely stressful position, and your body takes a hit and your mind takes a hit. And a lot of us fall into depression, in the first few years after school. And I certainly did.
Yeah. You shut yourself off because after a tough day, you just want to go home and sit, and then you miss out on. So I'm thinking when you graduate from vet school, you're, somewhere between 24 to 32 years of age, those are prime years. You should be out experiencing things. You should be meeting friends or, with your partner or, hanging out with your kids if you have them. Right. And you just, clinical practice and the depression that came to me when I was doing that just sucked all the life out of me. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to do anything. My relationship with my parents and my, rest of my family and friends, it really suffered. And to get that weight off, mm-hmm. so many other things fall into place. Mm-hmm. It really does.
Right. Well, let me ask you, was it the hours that did you in, or was it spending all day talking to people? Are you an introvert and that just sucks all the energy out of you versus an extrovert that really feeds on that kind of thing? What was it about clinical practice versus non-clinical practice that was so hard on you personally?
Yeah, it was a lot of hours. It took a lot of time, but that's kind of with a lot of jobs. You put a lot of hours into them.
It's true.
One thing that really, took the life out of and sucked the joy out of the job for me was doing all the stuff right. Spending the extra time explaining to people why I think it's this and why we should do these diagnostics, and going back and forth for what seemed like forever on what the proper treatment is and the diagnostics, and then doing everything right. And then having a bad result at the end, the cat still dies or the owner's still mad at you, even if the pet does live. They're angry with the price of it or the outcome. Mm-hmm. And just the idea that there wasn't this return on what I put into it.
Yeah.
Now you can say that for a lot of things, but it affected me specifically a lot. That was one thing that really dragged on me. And I would say a lot of veterinarians probably are that introverted extrovert or extroverted introvert. We're really good at interacting with people when we need to, but I know I prefer after a long day to kind of go home, at least for a while, chill with the pets at the house and kind of recharge. That's how I recharge. And if it's a very busy day, you may not sit down. You may be going from room to room to room, and you don't sit down for lunch and you don't recharge those batteries, which for me, it built up. It did. I put on a ton of weight from stress eating. And,
me too.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't do health. I wasn't living a healthy lifestyle, and it started to pile up.
So then you had your epiphany, okay, clinical practice, not for me. I'm going to look for something else. And while you stayed at the general practice while you looked for another job, or did you make a clean cut and
I made a clean cut and I actually started doing relief work in the Dallas area. Nice. Relief, it's of course a risk to do that, but it does offer you a lot of the flexibility you need in terms of hours to go interview for other positions. You don't have to worry about your boss finding out that you're looking for another job. It doesn't work in all settings, because in a small town, there may be one or two clinics that you would be able to work at. Thankfully, I was in Dallas, Fort Worth, which is giant, and there's hundreds of vet clinics that I could go to. But if it's possible, people who want to make that switch a big career jump, I do recommend relief work to kind of offer you that flexibility, because you need it to do these trips, to do the interviews. Now, that probably doesn't work if it's your first year out, because you may not have the clinical skill set. You may not have the confidence you need to work without that safety net of someone there with you to kind of walk you through things. But if you do, if you've been out 4 or 5 years like I was, you kind of hit your stride. You knew what was going on. You could work around if a certain clinic doesn't have Baytril and that's your go-to, you can find a way around and use something else. You got that.
Right. Whereas in your first year, if that happens, you're like, what are we going to do?
Flipping out. Exactly. What am I going to do? Yeah, we need to call a clinic and get some Baytril over here.
Yeah. Good point. That's great advice. And so it took you, did you say it was about a year for you to find the position that you have now?
Yeah, probably about a year, maybe a year and a half. From when I started and started interviewing, looking all around. A lot of my job search process was going to a bunch of non-clinical conferences, or going to conferences and then going to a lot of the non-clinical stuff. So going up to Chicago for the ABMA's Veterinary Leadership Conference. That just happened in January in Chicago, and it's non-clinical. It's all about kind of how the ABMA functions and how organized veterinary medicine functions. That was kind of my introduction to it. Going to Texas VMA's convention and trying to get involved in one of their leadership initiatives. So it's kind of stepping out and still going to the events, but finding new things to do there that would lead me down the non-clinical path.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't even know about some of these conferences, non-clinical conferences.
Yep. The big ones, so ABMA gets a lot of talk. Their big convention, which does have a lot of clinical stuff. VMX, is that what they're calling North American now? There's that one. There's Western out in Vegas. Those are kind of some big ones that people think of. But there are these other non-clinical ones that I think would serve people well who want to get out of clinics and want to get into a non-clinical role, whether that be in industry or in academia, government, nonprofit, all that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'll have to do a search and try to find some specifically non-clinical ones. So you've got the big CE conferences, and they've got clinical, but they also have some lectures on the non-clinical stuff. And I guess you could go to those lectures, try to network, talk to people.
Exactly. Even at the big ones, even if you do have a bunch of clinical stuff stacked in, try to go to one on. They'll have ones all the time on leadership, on communication, on. A lot of them will even have veterinarians in the federal government who come to deliver those talks. Talk to them afterwards. Go kind of bend their ear and see what they think. Tell them what you want to do and see what they think your first step should be.
Nice. That's great advice. Yeah. Okay. And then so how exactly did you get this job where you're at now with the Animal Health Institute?
Yeah. So we'll go back to ABMA. A job came up on the ABMA's Veterinary Career Center to interview for a position up here. And I was able to get an interview, and I came up here and interviewed for it, and I didn't get it. Didn't fit that position. And so I went back home to Texas, and I actually came back up to D.C. for the ABMA's legislative fly-in, where the ABMA takes you to your congressman's office or your senator's office up on Capitol Hill, and you actually lobby for some programs for the ABMA. And while I was at that meeting, I got another email from AHI, from the Animal Health Institute, saying, no, you didn't get that position you interviewed for. Another position, a similar one, will be opening soon. We wanted to see if you wanted to interview for that. I thought, yeah, of course, I'll come check it out and see it. And it was something that I didn't think I was, very well equipped or qualified for. But in hindsight, I was a good fit for it, and I've been doing well. I interviewed for that position and got it, and it's been a great. It's been 8 months now, 8 or 9 months, and I'm loving every minute of it.
Nice. And what was it about the position that you didn't think you were necessarily equipped for that turned out not to be true?
Yeah. So the position is the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Veterinary Biologics section. So it's pretty much acting as the go-between for the USDA and the manufacturers of vaccines in the U.S., neither of which I'd had any experience with. We all know how vaccines work, but I didn't know all that goes into licensing them, testing them, making sure that they're, safe and efficacious and potent and all that. That was all, we can talk for days about how steep that learning curve was. Also, I didn't really know what branch of the USDA regulated it. I'd never really give it a much thought. I thought, vaccines come to me in the clinic and I give them, and bada bing, bada boom, we're done. There's a lot more behind it. There's people I know now like me behind the scenes making sure that those two groups, those two very important groups, the manufacturers and the regulators, are simpatico on a lot of the stuff. They see problems from the same way, and they're able to get a good quality product out there at good price points so that we can get all the benefits that the vaccines and biologics confer.
So you're sort of the in-between between the manufacturers and the regulators. So the FDA, it's the
USDA.
Oh, USDA, right. See, I don't get it straight either. Yep. But there's, I know that you guys deal with, depending on which department you're in, you deal with the EPA, the FDA, the USDA. But because you work on vaccines, you're dealing with the USDA.
Exactly. I deal with USDA almost exclusively. My counterpart, she's the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Animal Drug section. So she's on the pharmaceutical side and deals with the FDA. The FDA, for humans, FDA regulates both pharmaceuticals and vaccines. For animals, they split it up. And like I said, the EPA actually deals with topical parasiticides, so flea and tick preventatives.
Gotcha. And now, so I just want to, let's just talk about the elephant in the room then for a moment. I don't know if you know what the elephant in the room is, but so are you a lobbyist?
I'm not a lobbyist. I do a lot of the stuff that a lobbyist does, and that I go to branches of the government to kind of press the case that for our members, but I'm not a registered lobbyist. The difference is well, for one, I'm not registered. Two, I don't deal with Congress like at all. I'll go to meetings and stuff, but I don't ever go to Capitol Hill and say, hey, could you put this in this bill and then pass it so that my manufacturers are better off or not worse off.
Gotcha.
I deal with the USDA, which is under the executive branch. It's under, it's one of the departments. And so I do a lot of the stuff that a lobbyist does, but I didn't need the level of experience on Capitol Hill that an actual lobbyist would do. I don't have to be on the registered list. And so it was kind of a trial by fire at first, seeing what am I supposed to be doing in this job, since I came to it fresh out of practice. But practice gave me a lot of the skills, the knowledge that I would need, the scientific knowledge. That's kind of where you have to start off with. You have to know how a vaccine works and how the immune system works and what an antigen is. Mm-hmm. So someone coming off the street couldn't do this job because they don't have the training like veterinarians do. Mm-hmm. A lot of the soft skills that I learned both going to business school, but also with the committee work that I've done, that I use more than the scientific knowledge, honestly. It's those soft skills of trying to get everyone on the same page, a lot of organizational skills to keep everything straight. The scientific stuff does come into play when I'm trying to put together a presentation to kind of argue our case. Right. Really, it's those soft skills. It's the communication that I rely on day in and day out more than anything.
Yeah. And let me just backtrack for a minute. I'm not meaning to disdain lobbyists because, the general public probably has a negative idea of lobbyists. But and the reason I asked you is because I looked at at the AHI website just to get a little bit more information to try to figure out what exactly it is you do. And it seems like it makes sense to me because you've got the scientific knowledge. And you're mitigating between people at the USDA who may not know anything about immunology or vaccines and the manufacturer, and you're trying to, in essence, really, what you're doing is you're educating.
A lot of it's educating. I'm really lucky in that the branch of the USDA that I deal with is populated by a lot of veterinarians. So I can, there's a lot. In a lot of positions at the branch I deal with called the Center for Veterinary Biologics, which is headed by a DVM. His two direct reports, they're veterinarians. It's veterinarians up and down the chain, honestly, which makes my job a lot easier.
Oh, wow.
On the FDA side, that's not always true. When you go up past the Center for Veterinary Medicine on the FDA side, vets become fewer and fewer. They thin out a lot. Yeah. And it does become harder and a lot more education on their part especially for my counterpart on the drug side. She has to do a lot more educating. For me, it's really saying, talking to the veterinarians at our member firms who are in a regulatory capacity, and then talking to the veterinarians at CVB at the USDA and saying, here's our concerns. I know you understand the science behind it. Here's the reason why when you wrote this regulation, you didn't consider how big a batch of vaccine is, and so it may not work with how you said to bottle it or storing it or transporting it, kind of putting together that production side along with the regulation side. So it is education, but thankfully, for me at least, everyone has that scientific background and they start off with it, so I have to do minimal scientific training on stuff.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And I mean, it's so complex. Like you're talking about the manufacturing and the bottling, and there's all these tiny little details. And the government has its regulations. And sometimes the regulations, like you said, they don't take into account the logistics that a manufacturer may be having to work within. And so that's where you guys come in. Exactly.
Putting them on the same page that's really my role. They find that it's easier because a lot of manufacturers will have veterinarians in a regulatory role, but over time, they found that it's easier for everybody to report to one firm, one company, which thankfully is my firm. And then we go and act as that go-between to say, we're the voice of veterinary biologics or vaccines in the U.S. Here's kind of what everybody's on board with. We've already done the legwork and put all the comments together. We've already fleshed this out. Here's the bare bones of what we think you should change or put into effect to make a better regulation.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. And I think that a lot of people, thinking about becoming veterinarians would have no concept that this kind of position would even exist.
I know I didn't. And there's people, if you don't want to, be in vaccines or drugs, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, so that represents beef producers, they have a ton of vets on their staff. The pork producers, the American Humane, I can go on for days about all the trade associations and those nonprofits that kind of act as go-betweens to make sure that the stakeholders on both sides of the issue are together. And veterinarians are highly, highly valued at a lot of those organizations.
That's amazing. So, and it's about, both sides, the USDA and the vaccine manufacturers, they have the best of intentions.
Yes. Yep,
but exactly. They don't understand each other's worlds, and they don't understand the parameters within which they must operate. So that's where you guys come in, is help them to understand each other so that they can agree and move forward.
Exactly. The veterinarians at the USDA, they have a lot more experience as far as what regulations they've done in the past that didn't work, that maybe some less than ethical players found a way around. They say, we have to put this in there. And then the manufacturers absolutely give feedback to say, hey, when you wrote that when you transfer this product from one container to the other in this way, that doesn't really work because the batch is 1,000 gallons or the batch is 5 milliliters. It just doesn't make sense because they come from different worlds, and putting them together, that's where I fit in. Very small part, but an important part, I like to think.
Yeah, fascinating. And you seem very happy. So you have a nice work-life balance now. You have work that satisfies you, that keeps you intellectually engaged. You probably, like you said, you're working with a lot of veterinarians with the USDA, and so you get to talk to people who speak your language, so to speak. And
I am very happy doing it for all those reasons. To be able to talk to people. Even people who are on opposite sides of an issue, but they know what they're talking about. When they say, when they speak their knowledge, they know that it's the truth. It's backed by scientific training and years of experience. And honestly, you don't get that in the clinic. A lot of times I'm saying the same conversation to 3 different people about how vaccines don't cause autism, and trying to tell them that. And they don't believe me. They have a distrust of veterinarians, or a distrust really of expertise, which unfortunately is becoming more rampant in our society today.
Agreed.
And in my world, I don't deal with that nearly as often. We'll still get some questions kicked up to us from different groups where I have to, kind of lay out the basic scientific facts. But a lot of times we're speaking at a much higher level, and it's much more intellectually engaging, which I love.
Right.
And the quality of life is good. I go home at 5 o'clock every day, and I don't think about work. I still do because I like it, but I wouldn't have to. I don't have to think about it and worry about stuff until I come in the next day. I go home and hang out with the pets at the house and really enjoy my time off.
Yeah. And so you're probably able to take better care of yourself physically, and I presume you lost some weight because you look like you're in fine shape.
I did.
Yeah.
Thankfully, there's a gym up here at the office, too, that we have available for us, which, I try to get that in the clinic, right? Try to get an in-house gym.
Right.
Now, I was fortunate in that. So I'm single. I don't have any kids. I just had the pets that I had to move up here. But, my pets' lives suffered when I was not happy at work. I didn't take them out and take as good care of them as I should have. Mm-hmm. Now, on Saturdays, we go to the dog park. I take my dog and my pet pig to the dog park, and we enjoy our time. I'm home, probably about 5:30 or 6 every day to play around with them. And then if I want to go to something here in DC, DC is a great place for young people just kind of starting out on their career. I'm not too tired or too just mentally worn out to do it. Physically, mentally, financially, I'm a lot better off than I was.
Excellent. I'm so happy for you.
Yeah,
now, tell me about your role on, this sounds really interesting. So you serve on several ABMA committees as a volunteer, but notably the Early Career Development Committee. What is that about? And how did you get to be a volunteer on that committee?
Yeah, so go back to my internship year when I was, working 1,000 hours and not getting paid for anything. I was actually looking for some volunteer opportunities. I wasn't involved with SAVMA stuff a whole lot in school, and I knew that I wanted to get more involved, and so I got on the ABMA's website, and there was actually an announcement that came out that they were starting a brand new committee. And that's how a lot of the work at ABMA gets done, is through volunteer committees, volunteering their time. And one was the ECDC, the Early Career Development Committee, which is dedicated solely to dealing with issues and creating products and services for recent graduates. So anybody between 0 to 5 years out after vet school. We also included in a few emerging leaders, so people who are in the first 0 to 15 years of their career, because that's still a time when you want to, maybe you didn't get involved right after school and it's year 7 that you're out and you want to get involved. The ECDC was a great way to start. I was fortunate to be a member of that first group. I'm still on it. I'll be on it until next year when I'll go off, but I'm on a couple of different ones. But the ECDC is really recent graduates' direct line to the ABMA. They have a dedicated staff member. Her name's Dr. Marcy Kirk. She is an amazing person, amazing veterinarian, and does great work on the ECDC. I would say she's our workhorse. She puts her all into that job, and she is fantastic at it. So if people are looking to get involved in organized veterinary medicine at the national level, and you don't want to have to work your way up through your local, then your state, and maybe become a delegate or something like that, I would highly recommend joining a committee. And I'll definitely say the Early Career Development Committee was a great way for me to start.
Fascinating. And what do you do? What was your role?
Yeah, so the what's required is you go up to Chicago, about to Schaumburg, Illinois, twice a year for meetings. You go and you meet with the other members of the committee, and you try to find the best ways for ABMA to deliver products and services to recent grads. So one that I kind of hang my hat on, the first year or maybe the second year we were helped to create this financial tool that the ABMA eventually rolled out. And we kind of put together the skeleton version of it. We saw it as a tool to use when negotiating for a new salary. You would go in, you'd put in your cost. It was a veterinary specific calculator. So it included all your loan repayment stuff, your licenses, of course, pet care. It was very extensive. And we're going to use it as a financial negotiating tool. So when you went to go to that second job, you had a way to say, hey, look, here's what I'm spending now, and here's what it's on, and here's what I should be worth to this clinic. That's kind of to give you your baseline, saying if you can't get this at that clinic job, there's no point in even continuing the conversation.
Absolutely.
That was, I'm trying to think. Yeah, it rolled out about 4 or 5 years ago. Still, it hadn't taken off as much as I had hoped, probably because it's so extensive, but it is a good thing to offer. And I could go on for days about all the products and services that ECDC kind of had a hand in. But as a committee member, you're really helping to drive the AVMA's direction on things. And with the ECDC, it's for recent graduates. You meet a lot of people that are in the same boat as you do. They want to be involved. They want to go on to bigger and better things than just being that local practitioner kind of at the small town, which is a great calling, but it's not for everyone just to stay in that role for their entire career.
Right. And there's really no way to know whether or not it's going to be for you or not until you get out and start doing it.
That's exactly right.
I mean, a lot of people start doing clinical practice and they stay in it for 30 years because they love it. They think it's fantastic. But, you can't guarantee that that's going to be you. So it's a good idea to think about, well, if clinical practice isn't for me, what else is out there?
Exactly. And no one's trying to shame people who do stay in clinical practice for their career, because those people are incredibly important and good at what they do. But I hope to help people get over the fear or even the shame that we kind of feel of saying clinical practice, it's not for me. A full-time clinical practice isn't for me. I want to do something else. And the great thing about that is you can still do, if you do get a non-clinical job, you can still do relief work. You're still a veterinarian. You get your license and your DEA stuff. You can go places, every other Saturday or twice a year and go do a spay-neuter clinic. You still get to do that as much as you want to. That flexibility is what makes it great.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about the guilt of not doing clinical practice, because I have talked to a lot of veterinarians who left clinical practice and they feel bad about it. Like they're not real veterinarians, which is silly. Just silly.
Yeah, that's not just veterinarians that would tell you that. Yeah, it's not just what veterinarians tell me. It's, people, my own aunts and uncles are like, oh, you don't like being a vet? You don't want to be a vet anymore? I'm like, let's get in this conversation. I'm still a veterinarian, just wouldn't be practicing, wouldn't be doing that.
Right.
And you're right. You will have to field those questions. If you do end up, leaving clinical practice and going to something else, you have to deal with those questions. But the upsides are definitely make it worth having that conversation and kind of feeling a little awkward at first to tell people, yeah, I'm not in clinical practice anymore. Once you see the benefits in your life, if you get the right fit at the right place, it's all worth it.
I think part of the difficulty is that people know what a vet is. Right? That's where they take their pets. And so if you say you're a veterinarian, they understand the clinical veterinarian, but they don't understand, what you do. Yeah. And if they don't understand what you do.
No, I had no idea this job existed before I got into it either. There's so many, and again, we could go on forever about all the positions in the federal government or the state government, even just the depth and breadth of career choices that you have as a veterinarian, it rivals just about anything else. Maybe IT, you'd have a little bit more flexibility, but in veterinary medicine, you are highly sought after in a lot of positions you never thought were going to be out there.
What if you don't have an MBA? Would you still be highly sought after?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my counterpart here at AHI that runs the much larger pharmaceutical side, just a DVM. Well, I say just a DVM. She does not have an MBA or any other training. She actually practiced for several years after graduation. She ended up doing a fellowship up here in DC that kind of got her in the area and got her to it. But she does a fantastic job on the much larger pharmaceutical side, and she doesn't have the MBA training that I did. So no, it's not a requirement. It's a good thing to have, and I'm glad I did it. It did require taking on some more student loans, but it's by no means required for these positions that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, veterinarians are smart people. We're doctors. And I think that if we get into a position, we can very quickly figure out what our role is, what the bigger picture is, how we fit in, how we can contribute. I don't think it's brain surgery. So, I mean, it's going to be challenging, but we're smart people. We can figure it out. Just go on, do it. Right?
Think about the amount of information you had to take in that first week in anatomy in vet school. Not even that first week in vet school with anatomy and phys and micro, whatever it was, like all that information. And you had to do that week in and week out for 4 years. Think about how much information that you were able to cram into your brain and how fast you were able to get up to speed on all these topics that you may have not had any knowledge about. The fact that you were able to do that people were able to do that and then graduate from vet school, that's checking that box to say, yeah, this person gets up to speed quickly. They know how to research stuff and get a working knowledge of it much quicker than the general population.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let me ask you another thing, but about this early career development committee. Do you directly interact with recent graduates? I mean, how do you gather the information to figure out what kinds of tools you should make available for them? How do you know what kind of issues they're struggling with?
Yeah, so the ECDC is composed of a lot of recent grads. So we have 5 slots on the committee reserved for recent graduates. And then 2 slots reserved for those emerging leaders and a few others on there. But one way is through the ABMA's Early Career Online Community, which is a Facebook group that we send out. Dr. Marcy Kirk sends out messages pretty much daily, often multiple times a day, either polls or questions asking for input. The ABMA itself sends out emails on their Facebook page. We use a lot of social media, but it's also keeping your ear to the ground at those convention meetings. It's talking with people who are also in your practice. When you go meet up with somebody that went to vet school with you, and you graduated with them a few years back. You ask, hey, haven't seen you in a while. What's up? What issues are you dealing with? So it's a combination of old school handshaking and talking, and then new technology, social media platforms.
Interesting. And so, what are the major issues that you find new graduates are facing?
So we kind of split them out into several groups. Of course, student loans, finances, always near the top. Wellness, mental health, that's always near the top. And career paths, career alternatives, or different things to do with your career. That's kind of the big three that I've always focused on. There's plenty of others, and people, we're actually going to have, the ECDC is going to have several sessions at ABMA's upcoming convention this summer in Denver, where members will lead some CE sessions on things that we think are important to recent grads. But those three, kind of what I've focused on, the finance aspect, and also getting involved in veterinary medicine, wellness, mental health, and then career paths.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now, you've given so much great information about this whole other universe that sounds like it's a huge universe. Lots of opportunities out there, lots of diversity and interesting stuff to do. But how would you suggest that somebody who's perhaps just starting in vet school, or is going to be going to vet school soon, what should they do while they're in vet school to keep these doors open? They may start out in clinical practice like most of us do, but just to keep these doors open so that if they decide to make a career change like you do, it'll be maybe easier.
Yeah, so if they're in school still, all paths are open. So, staying involved in SAVMA organized organizations at that level, but also looking at stuff that will help them maybe in a non-clinical career path afterwards. So there's tons of externships you can do at all branches of the government. The USDA, so the branch that I deal with, the CVB, you can probably email them directly, and they'll bring them out there for a few weeks in Ames, Iowa to have you there. The ABMA does externships on the Hill, on Capitol Hill up in DC. So if you think you do want to get kind of into the government relations or the lobbying realm, do that. If you want to be in industry, or you want to be in corporate practice, so Hills has a program, as does Purina and VCA. All those places at their corporate practice have programs where you can come in and do 2 weeks, 4 weeks. You can probably do it longer if you wanted to, where you learn either on a break or maybe even during a fourth-year rotation what it'd be like working at that level and who to make contacts with to do that. If you really want to go all out and go the government route, or the government relations route, the ABMA has a fellowship program where after vet school, it doesn't have to be right afterwards. They actually pay for you to go and work in a congressman or a senator's office. You go and for a year, you're a fellow on the Hill, and you are part of a legislator's staff, and you're a subject matter expert. Anything that comes up in agriculture, animals, environmental stuff, it could be anything scientific. They're gonna lean on you pretty hard because they know you're highly trained. Having that DVM behind your name, they're highly sought after. ABMA fellows are very highly sought after on the Hill. So look into that. If students should look into that and kind of plan for that if they want to go that route. And
that's something that you would apply to as a fourth-year student to do after.
You can apply as a fourth-year student. A lot of people, they'll go out and they'll practice for a few years and then come back and do it. But it's something good to have on your radar. And if you know that you want to go to that right out the gate, there's a guy I know who's doing one this year, and he came right after vet school. Another guy that went to A&M, he was a few years after me. Right after he graduated, went and did the fellowship. So yeah, it's not that you have to do it your first year out. A lot of people wait a few years and then go do it.
So I know that there's an application process. You don't just sign here and then you go to Washington, D.C. But what are some of the things that you think might make somebody a competitive candidate?
For the fellowship program?
Yes.
Yeah. So being involved before you apply is good. So being involved in SAVMA, even if you don't have to be the president of your school's SAVMA group, just having some position there, knowing a few people and giving input back on stuff, things you can lean on. So to make you stand out from the person who just kind of does it on a whim. As far as, getting yourself set up, there's not a book you're going to go read or, kind of try to learn about the subject matter that you would talk about. A good way to do it would be to reach out to people who've done it previously. So there's a list, I'm pretty sure there's a list on the ABMA's website of previous fellowship members that have done that have completed the fellowship. Email them, ask them what they think you should do. Let me say, I interviewed and I didn't get it, so I can only tell you from the outside looking in how to do it. But it is a very valuable program, both for legislators and especially for the ABMA and for the people who do it.
Right. But it does require, so for instance, if you're, let's say you're a new vet, you've been practicing a couple of years and it never occurred to you before. And I wasn't in SAVMA when I was in school like you. Mm-hmm. So, I don't have that. But after you graduate, you've been out for a couple of years, then it sounds like a good thing to do is maybe volunteer for one of these ABMA committees, donate your time, get involved, get to know people. Then you can have that on your resume to apply for the
That was my path. And when they do the trip. So when you go to Schaumburg, the ABMA pays for your flight and your hotel and meals and all that. You're not out of pocket for doing this. They really do value you giving your time because they know you have to leave work and leave your family and find something to do with your pets and all that to go up there a few days, a couple times a year. But yeah, that's how I started. I joined a single committee at the ABMA, and I can track a lot of the stuff that I did back to that, sending that application in for the ECDC back in 2013, I think.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, are there any final words of advice that you'd like to offer future or even current veterinarians?
I would say if you're looking for a new path and a new career, not in the clinics, you want something non-clinical, either in government, trade associations, anything like that, be geographically flexible. I come from Texas, and if there's one thing people in Texas will tell you about, it's how much they love Texas, which I do too. But I know that not all the best opportunities are back in the Lone Star State. This is a better opportunity for me up in DC. So there's never been a better time, honestly, to live across the country. You got Southwest that will fly you anywhere in the country practically for free. You got FaceTime and email and text messaging that keeps you in touch with family and friends back home. Life is about getting out there and living these adventures. There's never been a better time to live far away from home. If you have to get home quickly within a day, you can. That wasn't true back in the 1800s. You may not see family members or speak to them for years. Yeah. That's not true today. And you open up so many additional paths and opportunities by being geographically flexible and going where those opportunities are. Mm-hmm. I tell people, don't be scared. Don't be scared to pick up and move somewhere for what is a better job and a better opportunity, because there's never been a better time for that.
Oh, I love that advice. I wonder if in the future, maybe, you talk about Skype and FaceTime and all this stuff. Do you ever work remotely on your job?
I do. And there are plenty of options for that. So being geographically flexible is good, but some people don't have to be. Some people can do all their, or not all, but most of their regulatory job from home. I have, so AHI's member firms, they have people in all different places around the country, and some of them can do it from a satellite office and they didn't have to move, or some can work from home, honestly, 4 days a week and still get the job done. It just depends on what that role is and what the demands of that company are. I could choose to work from home any day of the week if I wanted to. My employer, thankfully, is very flexible, and as long as I get my job done, I can decide for myself how to do that job. I like to come into the office because I like to separate out my work life from my personal life in physical spaces. That's just how I like to work. But no, there are opportunities to work from home, work remotely. You just have to make sure that's laid out when you first get into that job.
Excellent. So, I've got a background in corporate advertising, and it sounds like almost similar to what you did, except without the science and without talking to doctors all day. But I was sort of the middle person between the client who was paying for the advertising and the people who were making the advertising. Mm-hmm. And really, it sounds like the job is, it's like project management.
Yes. Project management skills go a long way for jobs like your your old one and my current one. Yeah, it's keeping people on the same page, making sure that you have a well-defined goal, knowing how to reach it and kind of how to measure your success. A lot of it is telling people what's realistic to expect from a project, saying, "Oh, we're not going to get rid of the USDA and you can do whatever you want to with vaccine production." That's not realistic, which some people will ask. But project management skills, the ability to keep many different people with many different viewpoints on the same page and working towards that common goal.
Yes.
That's leadership, that's project management, and that's communication.
Yeah.
That's where 95% of my day is spent.
Yeah. And those, anything that you do to build those skills, never wasted. Never
Exactly.
wasted.
That's where your volunteer time and Rotary Club, committees, local VMAs, that's all going to make you very well prepared for that.
Excellent. Okay. Any last words?
I'm going to make sure to make a write-up available to all Dr. K's listeners that I did that actually list out the steps you need to take and the people you need to contact if you want to get into the regulatory or the public policy arena. It can be kind of hard to know where to start, and I did a write-up that I hope will help people start on that path.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I will post that in the show notes of the podcast.
Great.
And really appreciate you just donating your time to help other people out.
I just appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your listeners. I think what you're doing is great. I think this is what we need more of in veterinary medicine is just people talking about different paths to go down. Like I said, I had no idea this job existed a year ago, and here I am, much happier than I've ever been. So thank you for the service you provide as well.
Oh, thank you. It's been an honor having you on the program. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Will McCauley.
Thanks.